Hey everybody, it's Mike Geoff for ChicagoJazz.com. Welcome to Talkin' Jazz. I am here with Geof Bradfield, the incredible saxophonist, composer. He's got a brand new CD coming out, Yes and Music for 9 Improvisers on Delmark Records. We are here live at the Chicago Jazz Festival, so for you on Facebook Live, you're watching us live, and for you on video, you're watching us not live.
Double live.
See how that works? This is a very technical thing here, Geoff. You know, you can tell.
I got you.
Yeah. So anyways, Geoff, I'm glad you're on the show. You played a set the other night here at the Chicago Jazz Festival that was unbelievable. And then you just played this morning with Soul Message. And now you're playing with Matt Ullery later tonight on the stage.
Yes.
And you have a brand new CD.
Yes.
Did you have any idea how famous you would be at this point in your life?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think I did know exactly how not famous I would be at this point in my life. Hey, Lauren.
So let's talk a little bit about the new CD. So the new CD, Yes and Music for 9 Improvisers on Delmark Records.
Yep.
It's your first on Delmark.
It is.
And let's talk a little bit about how this came about. Now, you've been obviously really well known for composing and writing for your own band, along with probably a lot of other projects. But what's different about this? I mean, this is Yes and Music for 9 Improvisers. That sounds ominous. I mean, there's a lot of improvising.
Well, hopefully it's not
probably.
too ominous. And there is a lot of improvising, but a lot of compositional structure as well. You know, I wanted to write for a slightly larger ensemble. It's the biggest group I've written for under my leadership, so it's a no-net. And it's divided into like 3 sections, 3 brass, 3 woodwinds, woodwind doublers. I play bass clarinet. Anna Weber plays flute and bass flute as well as saxophone, and 3 rhythm section. And so it's sort of about putting different configurations of those trios together, and of course different configurations of the 9. But the Yes and Music for 9 Improvisers really comes from that improv theater saying yes and. Whenever anybody brings something out in improv theater, you're supposed to accept it immediately and just add to it rather than rejecting it, which, you know, of course is a good principle, rule of thumb for jazz improvisers as well.
So is this something where you came up with a structure, you wrote the structure of the tune, and then you just left it to the other musicians to improvise and compose and work off of each other?
Yeah, you know, there's actually kind of 2 different sorts of pieces. So the yes and phrase is sort of inspired by the Compass Players, who in Hyde Park formed one of the most important, probably the most important improv theater unit in America. You know, they went on to become Second City, and then people went on to direct The Graduate, to create Saturday Night Live, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things the Compass Theater used to do is they had some set pieces, like they'd have a Brecht play or something like that, and in between they'd have these improv games. So my piece works kind of the same way. There are 4 big no-net pieces that are pretty set and more composed, although they have space for improvisation woven into them. And then before each one of those, there's a trio piece that there's maybe at the most 4 to 8 measures of composed material, and the rest is improvised based on sort of some very loose rules, much like improv games in theater.
Ah, okay. Yeah. All right. And this is the first time you really came up with this concept, right? I mean, for composition, because
very different.
Your past CDs were really well structured, obviously well written and composed, and there's a lot of different configurations of instruments. So is this like the first time you did this configuration of instruments?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, the no-net's the biggest configuration, although it's just a slight expansion from the 7-piece group before. It offers just tons of more color and range possibilities. So that's different. And then the idea, I mean, I really wanted to write some small, short pieces that were relatively open. Because sometimes, you know, I get to the end of a recording and realize, everything's kind of epic in the 8 to 11 minute category. Right. And there's some epic on this. I mean, the centerpiece of it is this piece called Anamnesis, which is the opposite of amnesia, if that makes sense. It's
Sounds
about
like you remember everything.
Yes.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, sort of.
Okay.
Like it's sort of it can be a cultural remembrance. It can be remembering something that was lost, is I think the most literal meaning. Like something you had forgotten suddenly comes to you. And we're using that in kind of a loose metaphorical way. So anyway, that one's 14 minutes long. It's not that it's not epic, but the pieces around it are 2.5 minutes and 1.5 minutes long.
Wow.
Yeah, or maybe under 2 for both the ones around that one, actually.
Okay.
So I wanted to have that contrast of some really short hits that were less determinate with these longer pieces.
So with this, now it's on Delmark.
Yes.
And we were talking a little bit before we came on camera. You actually recorded this before it became on Delmark. And why don't we talk about how, because this is a great story. We all love Bob Kester. So Bob Kester comes to the Green Mill and sees you. So this is how the whole thing came about on Delmark.
Yeah, I absolutely, it was not my intention to approach Delmark. I mean, I really didn't know what I was going to do with the final recorded project yet. You know, just getting 9 people in the studio into some gigs and rehearsing, getting the music down. I think I'd had the music recorded for about 2 weeks when I was playing with Soul Message at the Green Mill. And they, so great organ band. In fact, I played with them this morning.
Yep.
WDCB, Delmark Studios. And I play with those guys fairly often. It's very different than my project. Groovy, soulful organ band, not a heavily composed, improvised no-net of woodwinds and stuff. And so Kester comes into the Green Mill, and he's hanging out with his wife, Sue. And they really liked the show. It was a really good night, stuff swinging, and he, in sort of classic fashion, I've recorded on Delmark before as a sideman with Ted Sirota.
Right, yeah.
But and been to the Jazz Record Mart 1,000 times in my life. But every time I go in, Bob, so he'll pretend he knows me once I'm there, but I know he's forgotten about me in the meantime. Maybe, or he's pretending, messing with me. But anyways, he walks up to the stage after the show, and he's like, "Yeah, you're a good tenor player. I bet you got a record in you. Want to make a CD?" I was like, "Yeah, well, in fact, I have a CD. Would you like to put out a CD?" And I went over to his store the next day, and we made a deal.
Did you guys listen to it? Did he even hear it?
He just heard me and was willing to put it out.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he told me, I think, he had Steve Wagner listen to it, who's his engineer and the manager over there. But Bob, he's 80 whatever years old. Right. He's like, "I don't need to hear that. Just take it over to Steve. He'll check it out."
First of all, you do a great impression of Bob Kester, so we need to have you just on the show doing
I hope
impressions.
That's not going to lose me my record contract with Delmark.
This is online. Bob won't see it anyways.
Cool. He's fine. I think he has a good sense of humor.
No, he does. He's a great guy, and now Delmark's been bought. Obviously, it's really well publicized. Delmark's been bought by Julia and Elvio, and Steve Wagner is still there.
He is. I think almost all of the staff continues there.
Right. And so yours was in production.
Yes.
When it got bought, and I remember talking to them, the new owners, when they were first taking it over, and they said they were really excited about the fact that Geof Bradfield was on their record label.
Man, well, I'm thrilled that they're excited, because the way I found out is I was on the road somewhere, and Dana Hall sent me a text with the article from the Tribune.
Oh, really?
He's like, "Hey, did you happen to know about this?" It's like, "Indeed, I did not, but my CD's at the plant right now. I hope it's still being pressed." We already did a lot of work on it.
Man.
Yeah. I mean, because you never know. I mean, Julia and I actually went to college together, so we have a long relationship, and they've been great. But I still didn't know, if somebody buys a record label, they may have a completely other plan of how they want things to go. And I'm very glad that it turned out that they were excited about the project and supportive, and it was a totally smooth transition.
Yeah.
And they've been just wonderful.
Well, so all of the information on the new record, right? So it's called Yes and Music for 9 Improvisers. It's on Delmark Records. So I know it's at delmark.com. It's also at geofbradfield.com.
You can find, I think actually to buy it, you'll have to go to Delmark.
Delmark, okay.
Or to Amazon. They have it, other reputable dealers of jazz music.
Right.
Yeah, Dusty Groove, I think, was out last time I went. They'll order some more if you call them.
Bob's Blues and Jazz.
Bob's Blues and Jazz, you can absolutely find it at.
There you go.
Yeah.
But why don't we talk a little bit, now that we've kind of covered the new recording a little bit, why don't we talk about how you came to Chicago and got so much into composing? Because you grew up in Texas, in Houston, I think.
I'm from Houston, yeah.
And I mean, now you're in Chicago, you're well established here, but what was that pathway to get here? I mean, did you go to school in Texas, go to college in Texas?
Well, no, I went to like a pretty famous high school in Texas, High School for the Performing and Visual Arts, under Doc Morgan, who, I mean, while he or the guy who followed him, my saxophone teacher, in fact, Warren Sneed, were there. Chris Dave was there when I was there. A little later, we have Eric Harlan and Kendrick Scott, Jason Moran, Robert Glasper, Walter Smith. I mean,
so they all went there.
A lot of great jazz. Beyonce went there. A lot of great jazz musicians and artists in general came out of that program. So it was just a really rich environment growing up.
That's just outside of Houston?
That's
Houston?
in Houston.
In
yeah,
Houston.
it's a public school in Houston. It's just a magnet school in Houston. It would be like going to Shy Arts here.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and Chi Arts here turns out a lot of great players too.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing.
So you're growing up there, and you were in school. So you were really, were you interested in jazz specifically?
Well,
or?
I was not a great jazz player in high school. It's funny. I was actually mainly a classical saxophone player.
Really?
I played like concertos and did competitions and things like that and was doing very well. I was very interested in playing jazz, and I grew up with my parents listening to a lot of jazz, and things like Roberta Flack and Donny Hathaway, Michael Jackson, all that stuff was in their record collection, and Art Tatum and Ben Webster. So I grew up with a lot of it, but I was a little slower coming around to like being comfortable improvising and things like that myself. So I started that path probably while I was at HSPVA in high school, and then when I went to DePaul University, I majored in jazz studies.
So how did you end up in DePaul?
So I liked the idea, like probably most teenagers do, of getting away from home when I went to school. Not that my parents weren't great, but they're fantastic, and I wanted to get away from home. Yes, and I wanted to get away. Go somewhere, romantic and exciting.
Sure.
And Chicago seemed like far away and exciting at that point. It did when I got here for sure. So it was also, I got a good scholarship at DePaul. They had the option to study with a great classical teacher there as well as pursue jazz studies. So it was just kind of a nice overall package.
So you did both. You were like really involved in the classical
portion?
portion?
For the first 2 years. And then I sort of gave over to what I, by that time, really wanted to do was I had lost interest in the classical saxophone side of it. I think, in high school, I didn't think about what that looked like as a profession.
Right.
And it doesn't look like as a profession. So,
well, there's a whole lot of things we could talk about there. But yes,
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah. Well, and it's really difficult. I mean, basically, if you're a classical saxophonist, right, you're waiting to get into one of the symphonies or something.
No, there's no symphony spot. You're occasionally, when there's a piece that calls for saxophone, getting called by one of the symphonies. So you're definitely going to be in academia. I mean, and solo recitals and things like that, but it's a very small focused audience. Some people really are able to pull off a career in that. The Cats in the Prism Quartet, very creative, exciting classical saxophone group. There's a few other examples of that. But again, for me, it was just like not what I was passionate about.
Right.
That kind of ebbed as I became more passionate about playing jazz and improvising.
Yeah. The thing that with the classical players too, I mean, especially when you get to a certain point, you tell me if I'm wrong, but you get to a certain point, I mean, you can pretty much play anything that you want to play classically. I mean, the notes are on the page, the interpretations are there for you to listen to and come up with your own. But to go from classical to jazz, the feel's different, the chord changes, the fact that the notes aren't all on the page for you to look at.
There are a lot of other
it's like a whole other
responsibilities.
thing,
There are a lot of
right?
others. I mean, I think that there's always continuing challenges in whatever kind of music you're playing.
Sure.
If you play fiddle music that's been played for 100 years, there's probably there's always another thing you could do better, right?
Right.
There's always somebody like Chris Thiele who plays the mandolin like you've never heard it before.
Right.
So I think in any genre of music, there's always some greater challenge or place that somebody special and devoted can take it to.
Yeah.
But for me personally, the classical route was not mine. I wanted to be an improviser. I wanted to be connected with blues and that's the roots music that African diaspora music that, that jazz comes out of. That just spoke to me more.
How big of a process was it for you to transfer over to that? Like, not even thinking wise, but just getting that feel, getting the improvisation happening. It's got to be difficult.
Well,
right?
I feel like it's an ongoing process. I played with Chris Foreman this morning, and I hope someday that anything I play will feel as good as everything he plays.
Yeah, man. Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, right.
No
I mean,
kidding.
so in that case, I feel like, man, I'm still a student sitting there listening to him and trying to learn and keep up.
Well, it seems like to me too, in your compositional stuff, because of the classical background, that's a lot of that probably helps, right?
It does, yeah. And maybe some other things, like I play a lot of clarinet, bass clarinet, and so on. So I had some classical background in that coming into college, and now I'm studying some with Laurie Bloom and the symphony and Michael McAferry and Eighth Blackbird. So it's not that I'm not doing any of that kind of thing.
Right.
I've just moved it to another instrument.
So it's interesting. How important do you think it is? I mean, you're a professional musician. You're making your living. You're teaching at Northern Illinois.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And, I mean, doing all this stuff. But you're still taking lessons from somebody. There's still stuff to learn.
There's still stuff to learn.
Do you tell your students that? Like, hey, man, when you get out of here, it's always good to, get a tune-up here or there or to check in with the different
absolutely.
players.
Absolutely. And I also tell students that, if you want to connect with somebody like a senior elder in the field, like one way to do that is to call them up and ask for a lesson. You want to know Joe Lovano, you want to play with Joe Lovano one day, and you're a drummer, why don't you call him up and ask if you can pay him to come over to his house and he gives you some feedback while you play together.
Yeah, that's so important. And it's so easy to do.
Yeah,
so everybody's pretty wide open to do that.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of people, for me, who have been mentors where it wasn't a formal lesson arrangement. One of them passed yesterday, Randy Weston, who was a great mentor and a really beautiful person, a great, huge influence on me. You know, he mentored other ways. He invited me into his home. He talked to me about music that he was intimately acquainted with, his music, that, you know, and gave me like some insight into that, a window into it that I couldn't have had without him being really generous.
Yeah, and you were
time.
just basically hanging out with him, talking music, and it was something that he was giving back to you.
He was,
because
he was
saw
absolutely
something
giving.
in you, obviously.
Right. Yeah, he was very supportive because I was doing a project devoted to Melba Liston, who is one of his closest friends and collaborators. So he really was thrilled to see that happen, and in return, he gave freely of his time and support.
Isn't that amazing? I
Yeah,
mean, but
it really was.
That's the only way this music kind of continues on is by the elders giving back.
Right.
And continuing it on.
No, it's
inspiring.
an oral tradition. It's an oral tradition for sure.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit about you play not only with your group, but you play with a lot of side quote unquote sideman gigs, but you're probably contributing in a big way anyways. But you're playing every Tuesday night at Andy's Jazz Club, the 9:30 p.m. to 11, and then 11:30 to 1 a.m., which I know you're excited about because you have to teach in the morning on Wednesday, so it's always a good time.
Yep.
But it's kind of a cool concept.
Little
so
physical price to pay.
Let's talk about that. It's called After Dark, and it's really kind of a tribute to Von Freeman.
It is, yes. So this started as something that the Jazz Institute put forward, and they're doing many tribute concerts to Von this year. There's been one of women in jazz because Von hired and supported many young women in jazz. Folks like Joan Hickey played with Von regularly. I'm doing one at the very end of the year with Michael Alamana, who is Von's guitar player for the last 15 years of his career.
Yeah.
And this particular one, After Dark, the Institute wanted us to do a tribute to Von by paying tribute to his influences. And he talked about Bird, Coleman Hawkins, and Lester Young as really being the big three for him. And so I put together some arrangements of pieces associated with those three or composed by those three. For 3 saxophones and a rhythm section, including folks who would work with Von some.
Yeah.
Dana Hall, of course, who just worked with Von a little bit, but we also have Dennis Carroll, who was Von's bass player for ages, and Mike Alamana in the band, and then saxophone players who were just old enough, or in my case, plenty old enough, to have gone down to the new apartment lounge. So it was myself, Scott Burns, and Rajiv Halim, and to have been mentored by Von.
Yeah.
So, and it's called After Dark because that's the first tune that Von ever wrote. So we start the set off every night with this blues he wrote when he was a teenager called After Dark.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. What a great concept, too. I mean, that's a perfect concept. I'm glad Andy's picked it up.
Yeah, they were fantastic. You know, they saw it, Chris Chisholm saw it in the paper, I guess, or online, and said, hey, we'd love to have this here because Von was here every third Saturday or whatever his day was of the month, every third weekend of the month, so and he's like, what do you think? Well, of course I want to do it.
Yeah,
it's a given.
So are you guys through the fall? Is that
we're through the end of the year?
Okay, through the end of the year. So that's at Andy's, and then you have another gig coming up. That's coming up. If you're watching this week, it's this weekend, and you're playing at the St. Charles Jazz Fest.
Yes.
Is that on Saturday?
It's on Saturday afternoon. I believe that we're on at 3 o'clock, but there's stuff going on all day. So come and hang out. It's a beautiful, nice outdoor event.
Who are you playing there with? Dana, obviously.
I'll be there with Dana Hall's band. Dana leads many bands, but this particular one is Spring, and includes myself and John Wojciechowski playing everything but the kitchen sink. And
is Clark
Summers.
Clark
will be here, I believe. And then Dana playing drums and cymbals and percussion. And we play some fairly adventurous music, so always a lot of fun.
Yeah, so that's going to be St. Charles Jazz Fest, which is happening all weekend, the 6th through the 9th. But on the 8th, they're doing it actually outside, right in that plaza area, right in downtown St. Charles. So it's an incredible place for you guys to be able to go see this if you're in the western suburbs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't have to drive all the way in town, which is unbelievable. And it's in the afternoon,
Right.
all ages.
Yep.
There's
a couple good restaurants on the square there, so
there's
you
a
can,
ton.
grab a drink, grab some food, and enjoy the music. Very
it's almost
relaxed.
like there's no reason why you shouldn't be
That's
there.
right. If you're within 50 miles of it, you should be. I should see you next Saturday with Spring.
All right, and of course, and then you're playing with Soul Message again. We should get one more plug in here, September 14th and 15th at the Mill.
That's right. We'll be at the Green Mill, one of the best places to hear this band in particular.
Yeah.
But any band, really. Dave Gimelo and the Green Mill, great supporters of the Chicago jazz scene, international jazz scene, really.
He always has you in, too, with your groups. I
yeah,
mean, I know
I'll be there next year with this No Net, in fact, that played here at Jazz Fest a couple
really?
days
You're going
ago.
to get them all on that stage, huh?
I'm going to try.
Well, Geoff, I really appreciate you stopping by.
It's a
I'm
pleasure.
glad he's got to go do a sound check here for the gig that he's playing tonight at the Chicago Jazz Fest. Of course, get all the information at geofbradfield.com. We'll link it up below. The new recording, Yes, and Music for 9 Improvisers, available on Delmark. And I'm sure in the next 3 or 4 weeks, you'll probably write another whole piece, and there'll be a new recording coming out soon.
We'll see about that.
All right, thanks for being
Thank
on the
you.
show. And as I always say, hopefully Geoff sees you out at St. Charles, sees you at Andy's, sees you at the Green Mill. Hopefully I see you somewhere, but if I don't see you somewhere this weekend, hopefully I will see you somewhere out on the scene.